Internets, welcome back to another episode of Sultans and Sneakers. I'm your host, as always, Maheen the podcaster. And on today's show, I am joined by Rana Zakaria from Grow Free, Tennessee. Rana, first of all, thank you for coming on. And I want to say that we met on a clubhouse room, I think like what, 3 weeks ago, was it? I want to
Yeah,
say.
not too long ago, yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Clubhouse so far?
I kind of have mixed feelings about Clubhouse.
Yeah.
I love that you get to interact with everyone on there. I like how you don't have to necessarily, use a chat box. But I do think, there's some beneficial groups that you can, sign up for and join. And there's also some, I guess, just not my type of rooms to attend. So I think it's great to
Right.
connect and network with people like you, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it was like so, and I like the smaller groups. I think the group we met in was like only like a few people in there.
Hmm.
And, sometimes you're in a larger group because there's like a subject matter expert, someone that like is established in a field that you want to learn something about. You'll jump on that. But
Hmm.
then you jump in like some of these rooms are like it's a bunch of people who are just small talking. But if it's too many people, it's kind of like pointless. You're like, yeah, this is boring. But
Sure.
generally, it's like sometimes you want to be a participant and you only want to be like four or five, and you want to have like just bounce things off each other. But when I came across the room you were in, um, I was like, you were talking about like this issue of like human trafficking, which is really what we're going to talk about tonight. But I want to ask you first of all a little bit about your background and how you got interested in this cause, so to speak.
Sure. So, my name is Rana Zakaria, and I work for a nonprofit agency located in East Tennessee called CCAHT, so Community Coalition Against Human Trafficking. And we're kind of transitioning into the name of Grow Free Tennessee. Um, so, I did my bachelor's in human services with a minor in social work. So, I've always been a helper. Went out into the world thinking I could save the world. Reality hit quick. Didn't like the first job I went into right after undergrad. Did some soul searching. Decided to go back and get my master's in public health with a concentration in community health. Did that for 2 years and then worked a job for a couple months at a crisis center dealing with suicide prevention, domestic violence, and sexual assault for about 7, 8 months, and then came into this job. So it's been about a year and a couple of months now at this agency,
Mhm.
and I'm loving it. And I've just always been an advocate and trying to be a voice for people, that don't have that voice, or for example, with human trafficking, lots of misconceptions about it. So that's a little bit about me.
Sure. As far as human trafficking goes, I think it's something we all hear about from time to time. What was your exposure to it? Were you knowledgeable about the field before you started at Grow Free, Tennessee?
Oh, not at all. When I was looking for jobs, I was like, why is there an agency for human trafficking? Why are we still going through this problem in the
Mm,
US? And you hear it all the time in third world countries and in movies and social media posts. But I had no information, I had no background about it. And then jumping into this role, I was shocked to see, especially in these small towns, right? We think it's happening in bigger cities, LA, New York, Florida, or Miami, but for it to be so prevalent in East Tennessee was very like shocking for me. And that's the case, is that people don't think it's happening. In reality, it's quite prevalent in East Tennessee.
yeah, that's the surprising thing because the fact that there's an organization just for East Tennessee was kind of like an eye opener. I was like, because sometimes you think, oh, there might be like a national thing or like a few
Mhm.
big city chapters, like you were saying. That was the shocking thing for me. It was like just East Tennessee, and
Mhm.
then and I wondered if we've probably narrowed the scope of what human trafficking is. We probably just think it's kidnappings and that kind of thing. Like, so I would say the first time I didn't know what it was called back then, but in 1997, I went to Bangladesh. I'm
Mhm.
originally Bangladeshi. I was born there, um, but I left when I was 2 years old. And I'm not sure if you like you were. I know you were. I think you said you mentioned you were born in Tennessee, in the United States. You were born in Chicago. I think you told me.
Yeah,
Uh,
born in Chicago. My
that's
parents are
right.
Middle Eastern.
Yeah. So I don't know if you maybe had a chance to go back to the Middle East. I don't know how it is, but my first trip to Bangladesh was in '97. I was 16 years old, and I remember the one thing that I noticed pretty obviously was the people who were begging for money, but
Mhm.
they didn't have eyes in their sockets,
Yeah.
right? And then I was inquiring about it. I was like, what? And it was like not like a one-off thing. It was pretty prevalent.
Hmm.
And what you hear is that like, oh, because they were kidnapped or their eyes were gouged out by somebody,
Hmm.
and that person has them going out to collect money,
Hmm.
and then they bring it back, and then they kind of make sure they give them just enough scraps to get by. That person essentially, it's like a slave system essentially,
Sure.
right?
Yeah,
I think, and you see in that in Slumdog Millionaire, there's a scene,
exactly. Hmm.
where I was like, oh snap, that was like, you don't even see it, but like the idea of it is so graphic, it's cringe.
Hmm.
You know
Hmm.
what I'm saying? So yeah, that was my first exposure. But is that something, do you remember as a kid hearing about things like that, or reminisce, like thinking back, like, oh, this is something that maybe I came across?
Sure. Yeah. I think for most of us, it was what we saw on TV, what we heard in the news, what we heard. These are very rare stories. And it always involved the snatch and grab, right? The stranger danger. Someone's going to pop out of the bush and kidnap you and sell you. That's even what my mom would tell me if I like wandered away from Walmart. She's like, someone's going to kidnap you and sell you. So that was kind of imprinted in our mind of that's what human trafficking looks like, right? So we know that human trafficking is a violation of human rights. Now, it definitely involves that force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial act. And it's very easy for all of us to think that this happens overseas or in other countries, or it's in these larger, like glamorized events. But the reality is that it's happening in neighborhoods and places that we know and love right here in the US and even, in those rural areas. And it's very hard and it's honestly very uncomfortable for us to think of that. I think we want to believe the story that we see on the news and the snatch and grab. It's more comforting for us. What we see in East Tennessee was, kind of most common way for someone to be trafficked is not through abduction or kidnapping. At least for the overwhelming majority of the cases that we see, and we cover 33 counties, it's actually happening at home or with someone that person trusts. So it's not that stranger danger, excuse me. It's not that snatch and grab.
Mhm.
That trafficker targets someone they know.
So what's the definition of, is there an actual definition of human trafficking?
So yeah, it's that force, fraud, or coercion to obtain that
Mm,
labor or commercial sex act,
mm,
and then human trafficking kind of goes into different types of trafficking. We hear mostly sex trafficking,
mhm.
and we talk about labor trafficking. I'm gonna go into my whole training, which I do trainings. That's my job basically. I go do trainings to pretty much anyone that wants to hear me talk for an hour and a half about a very uncomfortable and dark topic, but it's quite important that everyone understands what it actually looks like. If
Mm,
everyone's looking in the direction of, oh, it's the movie Taken, oh, it's the snatch and grab, and it's actually, mom trafficking her kid or a boyfriend or a partner trafficking their lover, we're never going to catch that, act happening right then and there where we're waiting for the Taken situation. With sex trafficking, it's that force, fraud, or coercion, but that person is made to engage in that commercial sex act. Now, this is kind of where it gets confusing, or where there's a lot of gray area. That commercial act, that commercial sex act, I think most people think that exchange is money, all right, which it could be money. But we really have to have a broad understanding of what that commercial act could look like. It could be drugs, it could be a job opportunity, it could be healthcare for that person, it could be dental care for their kid, and that's going to make it very challenging for us to catch that act happening. We're not going to always see those indicators right then and there, or that transaction where someone's saying, "Here's $20 to have this person." It might be where mom is trafficking her kid to landlord, and at the end of the month, rent's gone down $200. So that's why it's really important that we train pretty much everybody.
okay. And would you say that it seems like you're talking about, like, and I'm reading the stories, um, I would have to assume that the majority of the victims are female. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, of the reported cases, and that's another thing is people are always asking us, give me numbers of this county and how many people are caught in this area. How do we give everybody, some kind of number that can, show them how prevalent it is? It's a very underreported crime. Second highest criminal industry, right behind drugs. And you think that when you're looking at these numbers, on the website Polaris Project, wonderful website for everyone to go to, they're in charge of the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Those numbers look really low for it being such a prevalent crime. And it's underreported for many reasons. We don't have traffickers putting on their tax return that they've trafficked 57 girls in the year.
Hmm.
The victims themselves are terrified to come out and ask for help for many reasons. They're scared of being judged. Traffickers put in their mind that they're better off keeping their mouth shut. They know how society views victims of sex trafficking. So there's many reasons of why that person is not going to, go out and reach for and ask for help. And again, that goes back to why it's all underreported.
Well, yeah, there might be someone who's hearing about this for the first time might ask a question like, well, is it just like a spiteful girlfriend trying to get
Mm-hmm.
back? There's always this like skepticism because let's I understand like the mom like trafficking her kid for
Mm-hmm.
rent. What would be a scenario where you have like a boyfriend girlfriend relationship that goes bad? Like, how does that work to be like that? How does that?
Sure.
What's an
What does that
example of how that could actually looks like? I guess how does that
Right.
materialize?
So that would be defined as intimate partner trafficking, which
Okay.
is another prevalent form of sex trafficking.
Mm.
Sometimes you have, um, and when we're talking about sex trafficking, human trafficking, it could happen to anybody because traffickers look for vulnerabilities in people, and at the end of the day, all of us have vulnerabilities. Now, some of those vulnerabilities are not apparent as others. When you have these marginalized populations, which traffickers thrive off of these populations, because these people don't have things that, me and you have: shelter, food, safety, protection, love. Trafficker sees that vulnerability, comes in, provides that, fills in that void for that person to where that person becomes dependent on a trafficker, right? So it's not this overnight process. Again, it's not that person popping out of the bush saying, it's time to get trafficked. It is someone that comes in, looks like the hero, looks like the savior, right? It's not this creepy guy in the alley that everyone is thinking is, going to snatch and grab you. It's someone that, you go to school with, or someone that you maybe share a couple of mutual friends on Instagram and met them at a party, right? It's never the image of that bad person. But with intimate partner trafficking, there's been we see lots of scenarios where whether it's a boy or a girl, they meet their trafficker, build that relationship. It's very similar to domestic violence. You have that recruitment period, then you have that grooming period, and then that kind of isolation and that turning out, where that trafficker is just studying that person. They're figuring out where those vulnerabilities, how can I push these personal boundaries slowly to where that person is going to do what I ask them to do, and essentially condition them.
Have you studied like the psychology of a trafficker? Like what the mindset is or how
No,
that
and
develops?
honestly, that would be some great research, but then it goes back to: do we have the population to study?
Mm.
Are we going to have traffickers that are like, yeah, sure, study my brain and ask me all these questions? They're not going to be open to that. And even when it comes to the purchasers, right? So the term that they use for purchasers is John. Who's going to admit that they are purchasing somebody for sex? A couple years back, actually, I don't know which date it was, but there was a report done through the Chicago Alliance Against Sexual Exploitation, and they basically were trying to do a study of men in Chicago that were purchasing sex. So they basically put out an ad in the newspaper saying, "Hey, do you purchase sex? If you do purchase sex, fill out this survey, and you'll get $50." Which I kind of found was ironic that men that were paying for girls were wanted to fill out the survey to get paid for. But basically, that study was showing that these men um, thought it was okay, that kind of how society has put an emphasis on, not emphasis, just talking about sex and the internet, and it's kind of played into the role of how a man thinks that purchasing a woman is totally normal, and how he thinks of her nothing more than a product.
Mm.
He's dehumanized her, and said, well, she was willing to pay for it, and it's kind of like pizza. It's a very
Yeah.
it's an uncomfortable article, but it definitely gives you perspective of how these purchasers are looking at it.
You know what? Yeah, you mentioned that. I used to work with a guy
Mm-hmm.
this is back like maybe like 7, 8 years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes he'd be in relationships and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But every now and then he would be like a year or two. I remember he wasn't dating anyone for like 2 years, and he's like, you know what? All I gotta do, there's a girl that comes by like once a month. I pay her $200.
Mm-hmm.
We have sex. Sometimes she has time left over. She'll make me a sandwich. She leaves.
Ugh.
Right. And it was
Yeah.
like, and he's like, that's, I don't have to worry about nothing, just the headaches. Like, it's like purely transactional, right? And
Yeah.
it's not like he just told me this in confidence. This is like said in like after a meeting
Mm-hmm.
with people just hanging out,
Like
kind
very
of
nonchalant about it.
pretty much like this is completely normal,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that people like I think prostitution and at least in the guys world, like paying for hookers and that kind of thing is so it's pretty like a normal thing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that probably because by your it seems like that prostitution and pimps
Mm-hmm.
that's like under the that could easily that's probably a human trafficking thing, right?
Well,
Yeah.
so yeah, the thing is that and it's funny because on the Clubhouse group, we actually had someone that we were talking about kind of decriminalizing commercial sex versus legalizing commercial sex. And the issue is that we don't have this, surplus of women that are dying to be, sex trafficked. The issue is there's a demand. This would not be profitable if there was that demand. We don't have girls that wake up in the morning say, "What do I want to do when I grow up?" Maybe there's a very, very, very small percentage. I'll tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
And there has been studies, I think it was in Las Vegas, maybe, looking at sex workers and seeing if they actually wanted, if this is like the career they chose. And the majority of these women said that they were sex trafficked when they were younger. And that was just something they had become used to for such a long time that, again, their trafficker told them there was no way of getting out of it, or this had become of conditioned to staying in this lifestyle. So, you'll have people that are on one side of saying it's their choice and they went into it, but from our perspective, it's so easy to say that they chose this lifestyle. They're a rotten apple, whatever it is, but the reality is just so much different. And I actually found the article I was talking about. It's called A Great Hobby. It's a little bit old, but it sheds light on the attitudes of men who buy sex in Illinois. And it gives kind of a very unique glimpse of, into the world that remains hidden and really inaccessible for researchers. Because again, we don't have guys who are just willing to let us ask them questions about, purchasing sex. But it gives us better understanding of, that important role of internet and why men think it's okay to do this. And it's disgusting. They're bad guys. And we always have people say purchasers are bad people. And yeah, they are bad people. But they weren't born this way, right? They were introduced to this by our society, by norms. We as a community have blessed this in many, many ways, and we have to take responsibility for that.
Well, let me ask you this. So when I asked about the psychology, I was thinking
Mm-hmm.
about, so let's say Hollywood, for instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
You often have these narratives in Hollywood that in a movie or something that there is like some kind of there's romantic connection, but then the guy is like manipulating her and maybe pimping her out to somebody else, but it's
Mm-hmm.
seen as some kind of fetish or it's
Mm-hmm.
glamorized in that way. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's what I meant. I was like, whoever wrote that script
Mm-hmm.
might have that psychology,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you think about like Jeffrey Epstein, right?
Oh
When
God, yeah.
I saw his like documentary, and then
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about this on the Clubhouse room, I was like, that's the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, he meets somebody, or he has Ghislaine Maxwell, who
Mm-hmm.
was his like broker, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak, meet these young girls who like, oh, hey, we would love to give you an opportunity. And Jeffrey Epstein's a multi-billionaire, or was a multi-billionaire,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they see it as an opportunity to like get ahead in life. And then next thing you know, they're like in this compromising position.
Right. And when you look at his situation, which is, I don't want people to get stuck on, okay, that's what human trafficking is. That is, human trafficking on steroids. That is a situation that, in his, he had a lot of money, knew a lot of people.
Right.
But, you go back to, he was trafficking girls that usually were extremely vulnerable, right? They came from, a diverse, low socioeconomic status, probably came from a toxic environment, some parent issues, substance abuse, whatever it is. Maybe they were sexually abused when they were younger. Broken people, very vulnerable people. And Epstein came in and, provided money, whatever it was, trips, adventure, excitement, shopping sprees, whatever it was, and groomed them. So that's what human trafficking is, right? Seeing that vulnerability, exploiting it, and keeping them in that cycle to where they feel dependent on that trafficker.
Mm. So I have a friend of mine had mentioned that they were
Mm-hmm.
getting interested in this topic as a cause to get but they were saying that like one thing they've heard was is that um you ever driving when you're driving and people have these stickers on their cars and stuff, and you might have a sticker where it's like the mom and dad, and then you have like a little cartoon of a little girl, little boy,
Yeah,
representing of like who's in the family
the
kind of
stick
thing,
people. Yeah.
where the stick people where you're identifying
Mm-hmm.
like is like so what's the so that's something that you're kind of is that something where you're pointing out to somebody? Although I don't understand why that would be pointing out to someone who's a trafficker and
Mm-hmm.
I've got kids, because if you go any public space, if I go
Mm-hmm.
anywhere to a park or wherever, to movies,
Mm-hmm.
I think if I take one of my girls with me, they see
Mm-hmm.
that I'm a dad with
Sure.
girls, right? So what's the problem with these stick figures, on the stickers on their cars and stuff?
I think it goes back to, again, that people don't want to think that it's, the trafficker is a mom or a dad or a partner. They, again, want it to go back to stranger danger. They create these hashtags and these images that, to where this is what human trafficking looks like, and it's actually not what, mom and dad or, a partner is trafficking her kids. So again, I think social media is a powerful thing, right? You can spread awareness quickly, or you can spread a lot of false information, and we've seen a lot of that with human trafficking. Is, you see that community warning post, right? Someone types that they were at the local, like, TJ Maxx, and someone was following them around and taking a picture of them, and there was this white van in the parking lot, and there was even a zip tie on the car handle, and this is what human trafficking looks like, right? And that post spreads like wildfire. So then everyone thinks that situation is human trafficking. And it's very
So
frustrating
are you
because,
saying? Oh, so I think what you're saying. I'm sorry to cut you off, but so I think I missed it. I think I got it now. The
mm-hmm.
person, if they oftentimes the traffickers are the ones that have the stickers on their car because they're
No,
showing off. They have this happy family, but they're the ones really trafficking their own family members. Is that
no,
what you're
no, no,
saying?
no, 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 no. But
Okay.
honestly, this is the first time I've heard the whole sticker ordeal.
Okay.
You know, Traffickers don't have to do these little sticker things or whatnot. The relationship they've cultivated makes it easy for them and their actions to fly under the radar. They don't
Mm.
need stickers, they don't need hats, they don't need certain vehicles. Their relationship they have with that victim is the best cover up. Right. Whenever we had the whole mask mandate, people were freaking out. Oh my gosh, how are you going to catch these traffickers? How are you going to help find these victims? And again, it's great that people are aware that human trafficking is happening here in the US, but the mask is not the issue. The sticker on the car is not the issue. The relationship that trafficker has with that person makes it so challenging for us to catch that act happening right then and there. So let me break it down for you. Let's say I'm a bad person and I'm driving in my car and I'm going to sell this huge AK-47 in the seat next to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I get caught, or the risk of getting caught, it's pretty big, right? It's hard to conceal this weapon, and I don't, have a permit or whatever it is to sell that. If I somehow don't get caught, the profit is okay, right? It's one item, one
Yeah.
product.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm selling drugs, right, and I have a couple of bags of weed on me next to me in my seat, if I get pulled over, I can easily stash it under the seat in the glove compartment. I could throw out the window, right? The risk of getting caught is not as high.
Mm-hmm.
Profit, it's better than that one gun I sold. But when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to selling a human being, do you think anyone, not just law enforcement, do you think anyone's going to think the person next to me in my car, who's not in a cage, who is not chained or has zip ties around their wrist, is being trafficked?
No.
No, they're going to think that's my friend, that's my girlfriend, my partner, my relative, a coworker. They're not going to think that that person is being trafficked. So I hope that people are listening to this podcast, take this away, that it's not the zip tie situation. It's not that person in the cage, maybe metaphorically, sure. But at least what we're seeing, and I'm speaking on behalf of what we're seeing in East Tennessee, it's not the zip tie, someone tied down to, or locked in the bathroom or something like that. We have had some situations where victims have been locked in with like labor trafficking in the basement of a factory. But, that relationship that they've cultivated makes it really easy for them to get away with what they're doing.
That's so you're saying the majority of the cases that you guys come across in East Tennessee are more is like it's a known person. There's a relationship established there. It's not like some kidnap kind of thing. Okay.
And that's honestly across the state. I mean, you will have some situations in bigger cities where it could be the snatch and grab, but the majority of what you're seeing, traffickers, target people they know.
I got you. Now, I remember in the clubhouse room you were talking about the Super Bowl is one of the prime is a prime example of a situation where trafficking can be facilitated. Could you explain that a little bit and why the Super Bowl or would it extend to other similar large scale events?
Right. So sporting events are, a common venue for prostitution, sex trafficking, and traffickers typically choose big events where there's a lot of wealthy people who fly in for sporting events or conferences and meetings, or where tourists are willing to spend that money. And it's just kind of a prime spot for traffickers to start selling, right? You have people that are, flying without their kids or their wives, to a certain city or bigger cities where it's easy for them to, make a phone call or go online, or there's plenty of websites and apps that you spend a good 5 minutes to type in sex with a kid or sex with a local woman, you'll find it, unfortunately. So these types of sporting events, can lead to a culture of the partying, the drinking, and often engaging in paid sex activities.
Would you say, because I don't know if like you having we're connected on Instagram. I don't know what the female interface is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But on my it seems like stuff is targeted towards, so sometimes out of the blue, you'll get like it might be a catfish attempt, right? You get a request, you'll get a DM from somebody. I'm like, I don't know who this person is. And you look at the profile, it's just booty pictures, for example, right? I don't know this person, like block or delete, like, so catfishing might be a catfish, but you're saying it could also, that's also a means of them exploiting their victim.
Yep. Yeah.
Like
and for some people, for us, we're like, ugh, gross. Some people might be like, all right, cool. Well, she's selling herself, she's dressing this way. Again, people think that they start blaming the victim, saying, well, she chose this lifestyle, she knew what she was doing, not realizing that there's someone in the middle who's controlling her. So yeah,
I've always assumed it's fake, like meaning that like whenever I get a message, I'm like, this isn't a real this is probably somebody who just like it's a catfish attempt.
It could be.
That's how I was interpreted, because like to me it's like, you remember, I don't know if you don't want to give away your age, but remember that show MTV Catfish?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, so
at first it was funny, but then it was like scary to see how people will talk years and years to this person and start sending money to that person, just through that the emotional connection. Lots of times I don't even know what that person looks like.
Yeah, I know. I was familiar with it. I'll say I had some experience in high school.
Yeah, I think we all have, especially like back on the MSN Yahoo days
and the AOL Instant Messenger. Yeah,
the ASL kind of questions. I think social media and the internet, it's great, but it also provides anonymity.
Yeah, I know. For me, it was like, I think one summer, me and my friends, we were just bored. It was before college. It was like a summer before college. It's like, yeah, we had something to do.
Mm-hmm.
So and it wasn't even called catfishing back then. It was just like, oh, there's this person at school we don't really like. So let's just play a prank. It's like we think of it as a prank. And then at the end of the summer, we just told them it was a prank.
Oh, man, come on.
You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, but it was, this is like over 20 years ago now, but
Yeah,
yeah. But then when the show came out, we're like, oh, this is so that because of my experience, it's like, oh, so you see a picture, you're like, oh, yeah, I'm getting catfish here and whatnot.
sure. Yeah.
So that makes sense because you're having these um big parties, you're having people like wealthy people with money coming into a
Mm-hmm.
city. um they are just thinking, and they're not thinking about like you say they're getting away. They're like people sometimes use like these things as like, hey, it's all, oh, I got to get away from the wife and the kids.
Yeah.
So that means it's like whatever happens is kind of like doesn't count or whatever. It's just like they want to just leave their morals or brains at the door and
Yes.
be like, I'm just gonna engage in this. I don't even want to know her name,
Mm-hmm.
and then boom, I'm done.
Well, they rationalize it in their
Yeah,
mind, and
right.
you read these quotes. Like one person wrote, something at your job makes you mad. You can't beat your wife. You can't beat your kids. So you go out and have sex to take out your frustration out. Or there's been times where they are starting a new job, and the guys take them out, and they say, the guy said, I didn't want to not be the one that was not fitting in. I needed a war story to tell as well. So it's crazy how they rationalize it and they dehumanize this person. She gave up her rights whenever she accepted my money. If we're agreeing on something halfway through, she can't change her mind. Or I usually call a girl like a pizza. It is crazy how these purchasers dehumanize these women, these individuals that are being trafficked.
Right. It could happen like fraternity culture, right? You hear about
Yeah.
hazing and that kind of thing. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
that it's probably another example of where that might be facilitated because, like fraternities have, I don't know, throw them under the bus here, but I don't know. I'm just thinking right now.
Sure. You
I'm
have
kind
just
of
a
thinking
young.
about various scenarios where you have
Mm-hmm.
these old fraternities, they have old alumni that are
Mm-hmm.
donors and they might have this tradition where
Mm-hmm.
at some point it's because I think the purchaser
Mm-hmm.
just thinks of it like, oh, I'm just paying someone to have sex,
Sure.
but
And that
they're
person
not
seems
like,
consentful.
yeah, but they're like, oh, I don't want to deal with, or they don't even, like, because the thing is, I bet like the guy I used to work with, I don't know if he really thought about like the system behind it necessarily. He's probably
Mm-hmm.
like, because if you start thinking about it, you're eventually going to be like, I don't want to do this,
Mm-hmm.
right? If
Yeah.
you actually start thinking like what's going on behind it, if you think it's just like, oh, I mean, most people understand that like, okay, well, it's not a career you're like aspiring to get into. Like,
Mm-hmm.
same with like with strippers and stuff, like strip clubs. I don't know that like I would have. Yeah, I'd assume that little girls don't grow up like, I want to be a pole dancer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Something is going on. I don't know if it pays well or what, or you're
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I having issues at home. I want to, who knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think people don't think about the system behind it as much, and it seems like, yeah, it's just glossed over. And you're right, our society, it's so sexualized,
Mm-hmm.
and just do it, like everything, like, obey your desires kind of thing is like, all right, well,
Well, I want to kind of go back to what I mean, talking about, like, the girl that grows up to be a stripper or something. I mean, there are some women that that's their career. And teacher, I mean, I'm not here to judge. But the majority of the like I mentioned, these prostitutes in this research and the study showed that lots of them were trafficked at a younger age. And I mentioned that anyone is susceptible of being trafficked because we all have vulnerabilities. But what makes somebody vulnerable? Right? Biggest thing, poverty, right? Poverty creates despair. And traffickers are going to specifically target poor and marginalized communities to offer this false opportunity to improve their circumstances. And those people in those times, or who are going into survival mode, are more likely to take that risk in order to provide for themselves or their family members or their kids. We talk about addiction. Not only are we going through a pandemic, but we're also going through an opioid epidemic.
mhm.
And traffickers use substance dependency and addiction to keep that person in that cycle. They will purposely supply that drug to vulnerable populations to break down the resistance and coerce them into that forced labor or sex. And when that person then becomes dependent on that substance, that trafficker uses that vulnerability to keep them in that cycle. And lastly, like mental health, that's another vulnerability. Lots of us, especially with COVID, it's taken a toll on our mental health. We have people that have been furloughed, that are isolated, maybe have gone the route of using a substance to, cope with all these, negative things in our lives. And people with mental health issues are going to face a variety of challenges, including being isolated, not really understanding what informed consent is, not kind of limiting that ability to detect those ill intentions. So traffickers are skilled in detecting these vulnerabilities and manipulating them to their advantage.
Okay. Last thing, I guess, what do people like on the outside, they hear about this? What are the ways that they can contribute to, help out this cause? What your things that you're working on?
Right. I mean, for sure, we have to talk about it, right? We can't expect this issue to go away if we don't talk about what is human trafficking, what is sex trafficking. I know, especially in the Muslim, Arab, and brown culture. I remember I told my parents I started this job. They're like, what? I'm like, no, just hear me out. This is how it happens. And still to this day, my mom doesn't fully comprehend, and I think that the language barrier makes it challenging, but what it is. So we have to
Mm.
talk, we have to encourage healthy behaviors, whether you are a parent, and I hope that parents that are listening right now are not freaking out thinking, oh my God, now I have to stalk my kid's phone. I think it's important. Kids are smart. Have that conversation with your kids saying there are bad people out there. They might talk to you like this. They might say these things. They might try to make it seem like they're your friend. I want you to feel, comfortable to talk to me about, whatever that case is. We don't want to just grab their phone, stalk them, and not trust them. In my opinion, that's not healthy. That's not the right way to parent.
Mm.
If you live in a community or a neighborhood that has, vulnerabilities or, a large homeless population, rather than looking at them saying, ugh, let's avoid that. What are some ways that we can address those vulnerabilities? What are some ways that, we can help out the homeless population, whether it's donating your time, your money, your voice, whatever it is. I remember I watched this amazing 30-minute clip before I started grad school called Working Upstream, which you all should look on YouTube. And it talked about how, this one worker noticed that this people were falling in the river, and he was saving these people, and he was getting exhausted from saving these people every single day. And he's like, why are they falling in the river? So he goes upstream and sees that this bridge is broken. And that the villagers can't fix that bridge because they don't have the resources, the help, the support. So this villager and his friends taught the other villagers how to fix the bridge so that no one was falling in the river. And that's kind of my approach, is how can we work upstream? Because not everyone is going to interact with someone that's trafficked, right? That's a
Mm.
given.
Yep.
Everyone knows somebody that's vulnerable. You can always help somebody out, whether it's, that person is going through some financial issues, or is feeling isolated, or has some family issues, or dropped out of school, or parents got in a divorce, or sexually assaulted. Those are all vulnerabilities. You could help that person out. So I don't want everyone to think, okay, I'm going to save a trafficked individual. You might, and that's great, but you could save a friend or a coworker or a family member that needs help and needs that support.
I think what you're saying is as well is that it's not necessarily it could be a male or a female who's being
Oh, for
trafficked.
sure. Oh, for sure. We
So
just had last month a couple of minors, boys that were trafficked, and I think again the thought that men can't look weak or be trafficked. I mean, that kind of plays into why we don't have that many reports of it, is because the victims themselves don't want to admit they're being trafficked. They make it seem like they're okay with, yeah, I had sex with 15 girls. It's cool. I loved it. Kind of
mhm.
outlook on it. But yes, men also are trafficked. We have a situation where familial trafficking, right? That's when a family member is trafficking a kid, right? Whenever I do these trainings in public, I ask people, can anyone guess who the trafficker is? And I always hear the comments, dad, stepdad, grandfather, uncle. Lots of times it's mom. So we've had this instances where mom has been trafficking her kid, who's a boy.
Mm.
So I know it's a lot of information, a lot of dark information in this short period.
Yeah,
But there's
but I
just
mean,
so
if you
much
don't,
to
if
it.
like, just the thing is, like sometimes our community, are like, especially our more immigrant communities, tend to have this thing where if we just don't talk, if we don't think about it, we don't have to worry about it, and it doesn't work that way,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh
You
yeah.
know, so
I
go
always
ahead.
tell everybody,
Yeah.
um, silence means you're complicit, and you cannot be silent about this. We can't expect this issue to go away. This is a public health issue, And I would say we do not want to be a tool for a trafficker. So we have to be active, and help out our, neighbors, coworkers, family, friends, whoever, because it's not going to go away.
Gotcha. All right, Rana, before we wrap up here, is there anything we missed that you wanted to cover on this topic?
Um, we talked about human trafficking, sex trafficking. Um, no, I would just say, like, for everyone to familiarize themselves about the resources around them, knowing that there are lots and plenty of nonprofit agencies. And if there's not, always call the human trafficking hotline and they'll connect you to somebody. If you do suspect that there is some sort of human trafficking involved, to definitely call the hotline, call law enforcement. If it's a kiddo, I want you to immediately call DCS and mention the words human trafficking, that you suspect human trafficking, not child abuse, not child neglect, human trafficking. It kind of puts it on a higher radar, for them to see that situation ASAP. And excuse me, got dry mouth now after talking for an hour. The number for the National Human Trafficking Hotline is 1-888-373-7888. So yeah.
Cool. And your organization, if people want to learn more about that, I mean, you're in East Tennessee. If you happen to be listening and you're in Tennessee or East Tennessee, where can they find more about you guys?
Yeah, you can head to our website. It's growfreetn.org. We also do trainings, and with COVID, I've been doing the majority of my trainings via Zoom, and I've done trainings for folks that don't live in East Tennessee, but this is still useful and beneficial information for them. So sign up for a training. We usually do a community webinar once a month. All of our trainings are for free because we get them through the grant, and we have trainings for like medical professionals or law enforcement, social workers, truck stop managers, hotel managers, pretty much anyone we can modify that training for. So I'd highly recommend that you or someone attends or registers for that training.
All right, sounds good. Well, Rana, appreciate you coming on today and sharing about a little bit about your field, about this topic that it is should be important to all of us, right? But sometimes we know is we're not aware, and I think sometimes what happens is that people hear about things, and there's so much noise in the world, information overload, social media. We have finite attention span, so sometimes it's like good to kind of have these conversations. So appreciate again you coming on. For our listeners out there, if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at info@sultansandsneakers.com. You can also follow this page on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and also on Twitter. And till next time, signing off. I'm your host, Mahin the Podcaster.